Hello, everyone. Welcome to Half-Cooked Ideas, a series of talks about thoughts you are unlikely to hear elsewhere. They will take you through the genesis of the Betweenness Model. It also contains an explanation for the origins of doubt and uncertainty, and it will introduce you to the language and convention, tampering, and meddling effects. Don't worry if you don't understand what I'm talking about. They will be explained in other talks. Enjoy, and I hope my philosophy is of value. Before we start with any talk, we will look at how each discussion relates to the other segments and how far we have progressed. The following talk would be an introduction to two important ideas: core fundamentals of cognition and the Betweenness Model. Subsequent talks would be organized as follows: random special case arguments about these two important ideas, and then we will have formal general arguments for the core fundamentals of cognition, and we will conclude with formal general arguments for the Betweenness Model. As I mentioned before, this talk is an introductory talk that will provide you with a quick summary of what are the main ideas that we will be focusing on and try to illustrate their implications. Several years ago, I found myself at a place that many of you might relate to. I was trying to grasp what reality was all about and what was it made of and how does it work. That led me to seek an answer. Science was a natural place to look at for an answer. It was fascinating, but yet I had this sense of unease and dissatisfaction. I had this feeling that the doctrines like matter and energy and particle wave duality have run their course and were limited. I started asking, don't you sometimes just feel that you are tired of waiting for our wisdom tellers to agree on how the world operates and what it is made of? I grew impatient and decided to take things in my own hand. I developed a Betweenness model that I humbly present. It might complement some and replace some aspects of our wisdom and understanding now. It might be the grounds for the next stage of truth seeking. I didn't stop at science. I also looked into philosophy, and again, it was very fascinating, but also not completely satisfactory. It led to more uncertainty instead of answers, more questions than answers, and so on. And it led me to the following question: don't you wonder, where does the doubt and uncertainty come from? Doesn't it seem as if we live in a perpetual state of claims and counterclaims? Wouldn't it be nice to know what the origins of doubt are? And that led me to develop the two core laws or fundamentals of cognition that I humbly present in the following talks. These explain the origins of doubt and uncertainty, and they also led to the development of the language tampering and convention meddling effects that I think are important to understanding our reality. So let's introduce the first law of cognition. The first law of cognition asserts and affirms the indirectness of truth and knowledge. We don't have a direct connection with reality. That plagues our cognition always and forever. Now let's go through one of many potential implications about this first law of cognition. Some background information is important. This is Nick Bostrom. He became famous for suggesting that we might be living in a simulation, and Elon Musk pretty much supported that idea. I think there's an oversight of the first law of cognition that made them accept that idea, which basically is less realistic if you agree with this law. Let's walk you through the line of thinking. Nothing cognitive, nothing mental happens instantaneously, and that includes all the products of our mind, including computers and processors. While, on the other hand, in reality, instantaneous events occur in reality. So, for you to replicate instantaneous things in reality, you would need a processor that is very fast. As a matter of fact, it needs to be infinitely fast for you to replicate instantaneous events that happen in reality. This makes the simulation proposal by Nick Bostrom and others such as Musk less realistic. So this is one implication of the first law of cognition. So where does the first law come from? It comes from multiple arguments that you can listen to in later talks. But let's go through one of these arguments. A singer sings, you don't instantaneously hear the song. Sound takes some time to reach the ear. So that's a gap that makes it indirect. Also, you get an electric signal or electric potential in the inner ear. And you don't get instantaneous awareness of that sound in the auditory cortex. There's a gap between the electric potential in the inner ear and the electric potential in the auditory cortex where you become aware of the sound. So that's another gap or another reason why you don't have direct access to reality. The same thing can be said about light. So we can state it as follows. All perceptions, including light, that strike your eye took time and traveled a distance to reach you. The brain requires time to translate perceptions into models, including light models of reality, such as the sight of the moon. All experiences are from the past and never instantaneously of the moment. Now let's introduce the second law of cognition. It's a two-part law. The first part states the following. The impossibility of term or convention-free cognition. And that also covers all the manifestations of the cognitive and mental process, including language cannot be convention-free, mathematics cannot be term-free. The same goes for logic, hummus, and cars. It's impossible to have these without terms and conventions. The second part states that all these conventions, none of them come without a price. The impossibility of tax-free terms and conventions on reality and on any cognitive process that honors these terms. In other words, terms necessarily alter reality and distorts cognition about it. Now let's take an implication of the second law of cognition. Stephen Hawking was a champion of the theory of everything, at least early in his career. Let's see what the second law states about that. The first part can be phrased as follows: nothing conscious or computational, including the theory of everything, happens without terms. The second part can be rephrased as follows: it is not just a jump of faith, but rather an impossibility to think that those terms are in complete agreement or harmony with reality. Basically, if you have terms and conventions, which every theory, including the theory of everything, is expected to have, you have to pay a price. And that price is they will never be in complete agreement or harmony with reality. Therefore, disproving the final theory or the theory of everything that were proposed by Stephen Hawking and others in the physics community. In fairness, Hawking did change his mind later in his career after being introduced to Gödel's incompleteness theorem, which states that there are always true statements that can't be derived in formal theory. Gödel's incompleteness theorem is a special case example of the second law of cognition. Again, you pay a tax when you use conventions and terms. In this particular case, in Gödel's incompleteness theorem, the tax is that there were true statements that the formal system cannot identify. So that's a special case example of the second law of cognition. So let's have a recap. The first law of cognition affirms the indirectness of truth and knowledge and our access to reality. The second law states that we cannot have any mental activity or a product of mental activity without terms and conventions. And it also affirms that the use of conventions and terms has a price. You cannot get away without altering the cognitive process with these terms and cognition. You cannot get away without altering reality itself by using terms and conventions. Okay, now we move to another topic that is dear to my heart, the Betweenness Model. And we're going to go through it in a simplistic way. So let's assume that we have all things represented by this circle. I don't think it's a stretch of imagination to actually divide that into forces and anything else, non-forces. And now for the next step, let's take a closer look at non-forces. One thing that in particular stands out is that these non-forces can be divided according to their change. A certain subset of non-forces seem to be conserved, unchanging, and others seem to change. So we can change this pie graph into the following: unchanging things and changers. Examples of unchanging things like the total energy and reality, total charge, momentum. These are unchanging things. Things that change include time and space, life itself, your consciousness. These are changers. They are not forces, but they are things that are changed. And there seems to be a distinction between these two that it deserves outlining them in the graph. Now, for the next step in in my logic, which you may or may not agree, it is my claim that these two share in common the changeness, while this is separated from these two by its unchanging character. So this makes me doubt that this line is true. I get a sense that it is artificial, and that's why I think it is more appropriate to divide things into conserved things that don't change and non-conserved things that do change. And it is the claim of the Betweenness model that this line is artificial, it's man-made, or in other terms, it's a scientific delusion, or a physics delusion, or a mathematical delusion, or one of our human tool delusions. In reality, the distinction between these two categories is less obvious than these two categories. And for simplicity, we can rephrase this category into forces and this one into conserved elements. That's in a nutshell what the Betweenness model is all about. So it is a claim of the Betweenness model that changing things are forces, and those changes things include time and space and life and consciousness, and not being recognized as forces is just an artifact or a scientific or mathematical delusion. And the line that separates these two is artificial and man-made. Okay, so the Betweenness model can be stated as follows in these 5 points. Reality is fully accounted for through two fundamental irreducible qualities: conservatism and betweenness or change. And through two fundamental entities, non-in-betweens or unchanging things or conserved entities, and in-betweens or changing things or forces. Betweenness, change, interaction, relationship, and force are fundamentally indistinguishable in reality. Possessing a betweenness or change quality rules out that thing being all conserved or unchanging or forceless. Lack of betweenness removes change, rules out force, leaving only conserved quality or conserved element to remain. Lack of a constant conserved quality is not possible. Pure betweenness is not possible. Something being purely forceful is not possible. Okay, so now let's go through an example of one implication of the betweenness model, if there's truth to it. Scientists use a lot of tools to discover new truths. For example, symmetry is used by scientists to guide them to the discovery of new truths. It can be envisioned that betweenness can play a similar role in discovering new forces and new truths about reality. So let's take an example. Symmetry can be applied to find new truths. Let's apply the betweenness quality. Space and time are classically seen as frames of reference, but space has a betweenness quality. It lies between 2 points. Time has a betweenness quality. It lies between the past and future. Therefore, according to the betweenness model, these can be considered as forces. Maybe that fully or in part explains some of the unexplained phenomena, like the expanding universe, which might be explained by a space force or a time force, negating the need to invoke mysterious dark matter or the enigmatic dark energy. There's precedence to this. Our understanding of motion was plagued before because there were unrecognized forces. After recognition of friction, our understanding of motion became much better. So it is the claim of the betweenness model that there are several unrecognized forces that might help us understand some of the phenomena in reality that we have difficulty in understanding. Also, let's not forget, things can be hiding in plain sight without us recognizing their importance. The static here was due to the microwave background radiation from the Big Bang. We didn't understand that until later. Maybe there are forces hiding in plain sight, like space and time, that we refuse to see them because the membership to the Force Club is too exclusive, artificially, and man-made. Before we conclude, let's play a what-if game. What if the betweenness model has some truth to it? Maybe that would open up an unlimited source of clean energy, and that might translate into world peace, or perhaps the eradication of poverty and hunger might be around the corner. This concludes our talk. Thank you for watching. If you found this interesting, please join us on other talks. And if you think this is valuable, please share with others. Bye-bye. See you later.